Hello everyone, my name is Cameron Searles and I'm an environment designer. And in this video, I'm going to be breaking down the unwrapping process of my senior project. So in this video, I'm not going to be breaking down the chronological order of how I did things, like I did in my modeling video. Instead, I'm going to be discussing the process I go through when unwrapping an object, along with my experiences and problems, because there's a lot I want to get off my chest when going through this phase of the project. So with that said, I'm first going to go over the exact process I went through when unwrapping a certain object. So when I first start out, I want to check if the UVs will unwrap properly using the automatic function in Maya. And what this does is it takes the object and makes cuts based on the 6 sides of a cube. And this is a good way of unwrapping stuff very quickly and efficiently if you have a pretty boxy model. But for more organic models, like the ball return, for example, even though it is pretty boxy, it has some organic curvature to it. I had to do the camera-based function, which basically gets rid of all the cuts, and then I have to go in and start making the cuts by hand. It was a pretty lengthy process to go through, but I got the hang of it after a while, and I knew where to make the cuts. So after I played all the cuts, I then laid out all my UV shells using the unfold function. And this was a bit temperamental because sometimes it would unfold things properly if they look round or squared, and some other times they looked kind of funky. It depends on what type of object you're working with. And I actually had to go in and fix some of these unfolds using certain functions within Maya's UV editor. One function was called straightening UV shells, which basically took the curvy edges of a shell and straightened them out based on horizontal and vertical axes. And I also used the smoothing function to help make circular shells look more smooth and round. And during this process, I was also busy stitching some of these shells together, because for certain parts of the object, I wanted some of these shells to be clumped together, so that way I'm able to texture parts of the object more efficiently. And plus, I did not want to have a bunch of 1-2 polygon shells laying all around the UV map. It just looks cluttered and unorganized. So it's better if you clump certain parts together to make it look more clean, and makes it a lot easier to texture. So after all that was done, I began laying out all the UV shells into a 1x1 grid map, so that way the UV map could be exported. Now, of course, there is a layout UV function that does the work for me. However, I had to make sure that some of these UV shells were scaled correctly, because I didn't want to have one part of the object have a bigger resolution than the other, unless I needed to. Like, for example, the plaques on the wall. I had to make sure that the nameplates were legible, so for those UV shells displaying the nameplates, I made them bigger than they usually would be relative to the rest of the object. So that's basically the overall process of unwrapping a 3D model. Now let's talk about my experiences with this process. I did not enjoy this process. It's always my least favorite thing to do when doing a project like this. Now, I understand this is a crucial element of 3D modeling for texturing purposes. It's just that my experiences with this project in particular were very cumbersome due to a huge flaw on my part that I should have thought of beforehand, and a function within Maya that I did not know was a thing until I looked it up. So I'm going to explain further in detail what I'm talking about. So to go over that huge flaw I mentioned, I did have a good idea of modeling objects in their own separate files before importing them into my scene. However, I should have unwrapped them also before importing, because when I realized that I had all my objects laid out within my scene, and then I went to unwrapping each one, Maya was having a hard time trying to do that. And what I mean by that is that Maya's UV editor kept freezing on me. And the way to work around that was to click off the editor, click back on, then make the changes. Sometimes this happened, other times it didn't. And it even happened when I tried working on the objects in their own separate files. So I wasn't sure exactly what I was supposed to do to overcome this obstacle. And my other problem was that the UV maps were not exporting properly with the 3D models. And what I mean by that is that even though the UVs were showing up correctly in Maya, they were looking completely different in Substance Painter. And I had no idea why. So I decided to look up the issue, and I learned that Maya uses multiple instances of a UV set for a 3D object. And to make this easier to understand, Maya applies the UVs onto a default set called Map 1. and this set is used when a 3D model gets exported. However, I don't know how it triggers this part, but whenever I made changes to the UVs, it created another set called UV set 1, and it was saving the changes to that set instead of the default set. So what was going on was that no changes were being made to the default set, and the default set is used to display the UV map of a 3D object when it gets exported out. And thankfully there is a fix around there where I could copy the UV layout from one set to another. I just hated the fact that Maya automatically made a new set whenever I made any changes to the UVs. It was a very frustrating experience, and I'm sure there is a way to prevent this from happening, but I never got around to fixing it. So that pretty much wraps up the unwrapping phase of my project, and despite all the problems I had, I was able to make it through, and I was able to move on to the next phase of my project, which was texturing. So thank you all for watching, be sure to check out my other pipeline breakdowns, and I will see you in the next video.